I'm Dimitri Yanikopoulos, the Chief Innovation Officer at Rad AI. Pleased to join you all for this webinar today, and I will be kicking it off now. We've all seen the hype, but what separates tools that actually change care delivery from those that fade away? Today's discussion is about what healthcare really needs from AI, from frameworks, governance, and lessons from people who've lived it. AI has dominated headlines recently in healthcare and more broadly. But what's actually happening inside hospitals and practices looks very different. The real story is about how leaders are cutting through noise, earning trust, and making AI work in the real world, not just in theory. I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Ainsley McLean, founding partner, Ainsley Advisory Group, former Chief AI Officer at Kaiser Permanente, Tom Hasley, CIO of Lucid Health, and Matthew Zawalik, VP IT Services from Yale New Haven Health. Excellent. So I'm going to do a really quick lightning round pulse check, with all three of you. So if we can do about 30 seconds each. We've all seen the hype. In your view, what is it that separates tools that actually change care delivery from those that fade away? Ainsley?
I'd love to go first. So things that actually change care delivery have to move the needle in terms of how providers and everyone that supports providers in the clinic or hospital environment use their time. I think at the end of the day, we have to do things that reduce friction and make getting through the day more rewarding, because the fundamental goal is really to improve access and care to patients. So a tool needs to accelerate the jobs everyone does and allow them to work at the top of their license. I think I keep it kind of simple like that.
That's great. Tom, how about from your perspective?
I think there's a lot of hype around AI itself. When you talk to anybody outside of healthcare, it's a thought that, AI, will replace physicians still. You still hear that, out in the market. And so, I don't think that, that's there yet. And also the thought that, AI is very easy to implement. That both of those, I think are common misconceptions that we're seeing or hearing from the market.
Yeah, the other piece I'd add probably is, some people have the conception that AI is kind of like a panacea, and that you implement these tools and they're automatically going to solve problems. That's not really the case. I think they have to be targeted to very specific outcomes, whether that's an ROI, quality, efficiency, safety, and then they have to integrate within workflows. And if they don't do those things, you're oftentimes set with a solution that's going to ultimately be a failure. So really having a targeted approach, looking for those things that are going to have broad applicability and have meaningful outcomes are really the things that we think about when implementing AI tools.
Awesome. Matt, I appreciate you taking the baton there because my internet froze for a second.
Yeah.
Great. No, that's an excellent kickoff. So, Tom, there's a lot of use cases. I know you as a CIO are approached all the time. How do you separate the hype, the shiny demos from actual scalable outcomes, that can be had inside your environment?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great question. I think a lot of people initially early on were very focused on the pixel side of AI, really. And, we're looking at it as where can you make a difference in the environment for the physicians? What do they really need? We're at a shortage of radiologists in the market, right now. You see that everywhere. So where can we gain efficiencies? And so a lot of those efficiency gains are more what we've seen in AI in the workflow perspective. So there's AI in the work list, learning radiologists, reading patterns from, what they're picking off the work list, what should be presented to them. And then there's AI on the back end on the dictation side, making that easier and allowing them to become more efficient. We did our own study, seeing, 11%, at least a 11% efficiency gain with the use of just an impression generator. And that's just one component. There's other, aspects around that study as well that they show some gains. And there's a lot of physician satisfaction around that. And then the other area I'd say that we're seeing a lot of traction or starting to is on the modality side itself. So using AI at the modality to potentially speed up studies and increase time slot, basically create more time slots, for, seeing more patients to be able to get the exams in the door.
That's great. I mean, the actual quantifiable impact of those. Ainsley, From your perspective as an advisor group, but also former AI leadership at Kaiser Permanente, why do you think there's so much hype? Like why do you think, particularly in radiology, there's been this focus on what AI will do versus what it has done?
A lot of hype because there's a lot of potential. And when you look at just the interest that AI and the generative AI movement has fueled for healthcare, whether it's investing in healthcare, deploying healthcare tools, recent studies are starting to show that it's actually healthcare that's really leading across all sectors in the deployment and scaling of AI. And I think we should be really proud of that. I think it comes from the pressures that are unique to what we face. I think radiology has faced them as well when you look at the shortage of radiologists that Tom talked about, but also the increasing demands of the average radiologist's work, right? When you look at how we all started out, I know I can speak for myself 20 years ago, training as a neuroradiology fellow at the Brigham in Boston, it was a pretty leisurely day. Got to look through a few cases, read out with my attendings. I know for a fact that attendings now, even in academic centers, are responsible for large volumes of cases. And so the aging patient population is contributing to that. When you look at the use cases, I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. And when I go around and I talk to groups across the healthcare ecosystem about where to deploy AI, the keep it simple next 1 to 3 years is in the space of documentation. It's in the space of coding and back office automation. There's maybe a couple other use cases you can throw in there, but really on that spectrum, right? And so when you look at tools like the ones that we use in radiology reporting, such as Rad AI, they're right in that sort of safe space. And so I'm not a fan of recommending starting to do, outside of large academic centers, maybe like Yale that have a whole, AI group and other large hospitals. I think just start with the easy wins. Get comfortable with AI, follow those projects through to fruition, track them for a year or two, because you don't want to get in this place where you're deploying too many different things. And then we all look back after 2 years and we wasted a lot of money and didn't see the result and didn't develop, true believers in that technology.
That's a great point. And Matt, in your role, it's not just radiology, it's enterprise IT. So like, what's the difference in your view between like a AI project or a pilot versus a truly scalable opportunity to drive impact?
Yeah. And I really see pilot these days as a dirty word. I think it's a phased approach to doing things, because what we get stuck with is pilot to death, and you end up doing these small little projects. You don't have a scalability plan. So you end up sitting in this very small scope for a very long time and you never move the needle. So I think what really is important to us is having a true objective, an objective that involves scale over time, and having the steps and the measurable KPIs that say we're marching toward that objective. If you don't have those things, you can often get stuck in a place where you are continuing this small body of work for a very long time without real measurable outcomes. And that's something that we really try hard to avoid in our space.
That's a great point. So Ainsley, from your perspective as a clinician, I've heard an emerging conversation around trust of AI, specifically in healthcare, given the dynamics at play. What type of evidence do you need? Like what have you seen really resonate in terms of being able to build that trust and show that efficacy?
I think trust is absolutely crucial, particularly of the clinician, of the tools they use. And we've seen sort of this, I think if you look at the AI scribe for a primary care physician or in the large practice setting, we saw that trust grow with time. It doesn't mean that, there's never hallucination, but with physician education and literacy, which we've really seen expand, I think, across the country, we can identify when there may be a problem with the tool, but also to really query and hold the companies really accountable for sharing, how much should we trust you, right? When you look at what is your accuracy, what is the sensitivity, what is your error rate? And so I think at the end of the day, and I'll sort of talk in specifics, if you are, say, using a specific AI algorithm for on the diagnostic side, on the pixel side of things, if that algorithm is failing you a significant amount of the time, that's just going to get put to the wayside. And we have seen, while we've seen some positive forward traction with AI used in a diagnostic space, we've I think seen that as a really good example of where there wasn't that building of both the performance and the trust potentially that there could be. So you hear cases of, well, I use this, this product and actually misdiagnose this. And that's really a problem. At the same time, we have to be realistic about our own internal error rates. We all have the continuous learning and peer learning as radiologists, right? Where we share cases we may have made amiss, outside of, say, a quality assurance program. But there's a process of continuous learning. So we can't expect tools to be perfect. And we, need to be realistic, because fundamentally in healthcare, you have large amounts of data. And that's just what AI is so well positioned for: synthesizing that data, presenting in a way that makes sense, helping with predictions, helping us sort of take everything to that next level to provide more accurate care. And we're getting there.
Now, that's a great point. Now, Tom, from the C-suite perspective, Ainsley's observations very much about built-in trust with the clinicians, right, and making sure that it's doing what's intended. This is a partnership. So these tools are now not just on the fringes anymore. Like, take the impression generation to a full reporting solution. Now it's at the core. How do you evaluate the partners for that trust that you can implement this as the right partnership approach to build this out at scale?
Yeah, so I think we're gonna get a little bit more into this, as we move on, as it relates to governance. So a couple things to talk about here. From my standpoint, being from a managed physician services organization, I'm working with organizations like Matt's organization, or other hospital organizations that are looking to us to say, what systems are you using, and what AI is being utilized by your radiologist, that we're going to be sending studies to your radiologist for reading. And so we're going through a lot, we're answering a lot of the governance requests, from facilities like Matt's and other hospitals, looking at, what systems have we selected and what are they doing to protect their data. So as I kind of circling back, as I'm looking at AI vendors, I'm going into a lot of those conversations with these governance questions that are being asked of me, to work with the vendors and make sure that they are doing everything they need to do to basically make sure that they're keeping the governance. I'm not sure that all the vendors out there really have placed a lot of effort into that. It's fairly easy. Yeah, on the Pixel side, I think I would say, and I've heard, I've worked on different areas, but on the Pixel side, I heard it's very easy to create, get an algorithm off the ground, as far as annotating and presenting an algorithm, you know, governing that and making sure the training factors and all of that that go into that algorithm is really what you have to dig into, and those are the questions that we're probing. Where did you train your data? How are you governing your data? How frequently is it updated? So those are the things that we're working through with the vendors.
That's a great point, and it's a natural lead into Matt, where I've been lucky enough to work with Yale across 3 different organizations now over a decade, and I'm constantly impressed by the governance process within Yale, and that's not just AI governance; it's also like the care signatures, like your versions of pathways, where you have over 1,000 in the approach there. You know, how have you been able to get your hands around that, Matt? And like, what has it evolved into given the period of time that you've been doing this stuff?
Well, from a care pathway perspective, Deb Rhodes, is our chief quality officer, is really the leader in that space, and has really done essentially amazing work to not just implement these care pathways, but educate providers on why these care pathways are useful and valuable to their day-to-day work. I think that is what gets people engaged, gets them willing to use these things over and over again when they see that, hey, this is making a meaningful difference to my patients, and it's making a meaningful difference in terms of how I do my work. That's where I think when you establish those things and trust around those tools, you're able to make headways. And I see the work we've done in terms of the clinical pathways is no different than the work we're doing now with our AI tools, in terms of creating that case that says, hey, this is something that's going to be valuable for you, whether it's a quality improvement, an efficiency improvement, a safety improvement, it's going to be a value. And it's not just us saying it, we're going to show you. I think there were some great comments here around kind of the evidence-based pieces around some of our AI frameworks. Sometimes that's harder with pixel data. I think with a lot of the Gen AI stuff, having an evidence-based framework, especially around where pieces of information come from, is really very helpful. I think in the ambient listening space, we work with a company called The Bridge. They do a great job of essentially surfacing the actual reference in the conversation of where something occurred. And we've had several instances when we first started that project where folks are saying, hey, I'm pretty sure it's hallucinating. I didn't say any of this. But when you can actually go back to the recording and show the provider like, hey, this is exactly what was recorded, there's a lot more trust in a solution in that type of perspective. So, or in that type of situation. So those are the things I think we find really helpful in terms of generating trust around our AI tool sets.
That's awesome. I think one of the questions that we run into frequently is, do you build trust using the data or do you build trust with the people? And I think that example you just highlighted with a bridge where it's showing the provenance of where it came from is both, right?
Yeah, I think it's both. It's
Yeah.
absolutely both, actually. If you don't have the trust with the people, they're not going to trust the data that you're going to present anyway. So you really have to establish it on both sides.
Yep. Now, Ainsley, in your advisory, capacity, how have those conversations been going? Like, has this come up frequently, governance of AI, ways to prove provenance of data and stuff like that?
I mean, it's a huge topic, right? And when you look at, there's a lot of systems and practices that are still, they've gotten through the governance, they've checked that governance box, but then now how do we take that leap and start actually deploying it? Two of the areas I'm really interested in for sort of 2026 and the rest of this year is actually around that space of governance and some of the AI sort of that can be put in that can give you this cockpit view of all the AI you're deploying in your hospital. And I think that sort of seems like a no-brainer, like maybe we should have done that before, but at the same time, we learn with every iteration that we do. And so, there's a couple of companies in this space that really are going to allow that C-suite, the CIOs, like Tom and Matt, to really sort of see, well, I deployed this AI scribe here. How is it performing? Or let me take a look at different options here, or for this radiologist tool, how are even radiologists performing with this tool, which is a potential whole other area. But I think at the end of the day, that's going to be key along with the agentic component. And you see a lot of work in the agentic space in terms of the outpatient clinic. I think I challenge our specialty to kind of think of that as well. There's so many things that radiologists are doing besides dictating reports and besides looking at images. And I think that our specialty is probably going to lead in terms of how can we use AI to call the referring provider to, do whatever it may be, notify of this critical result. But when I say agentic, I mean, literally, you just kind of say, even just the report gets issued and then all of that's happening. Because when you look at surveys that have been done across almost every industry, and, the public perception of AI has really moved in the wrong direction, right? Between 2024 and 2025, more people actually are concerned about the use of AI in healthcare than aren't concerned. But when you then look across every industry, there was work out of Stanford showing that if the AI is being used to take away those tasks in your day that you feel aren't a good use of your time and allow you to practice at the top of your license, it's actually almost universally supported and accepted. So I'm excited about kind of both of those pieces, but I think that we need to take the governance responsibility off of the C-suite's plate, or at least make it as easy as possible for them, because I don't think a human being can monitor these tools, monitor for drift, right? We know there's a lot of potential drift, and we encounter that as well. There's a lot of variation when you look across patient populations for large systems like Lucid and Yale. They may have a different performance of an algorithm in one center that maybe is an urban center versus a more suburban center. I think the C-suite should be able to see, well, how is this performing? What different results am I getting? And then learn from that and then optimize the model.
I think that's a great point. I think it's incumbent on vendors and partners in this space to enable the folks that they're working with to accomplish that. And Tom, I'm gonna
just comment, make a quick comment on this. So I think this is an important conversation, and we absolutely need the vendors in our space to help us here. I think it would be a shame to see the healthcare industry have each individual health system or or individual provider groups develop their own frameworks around monitoring capabilities. It's just too big of a job to separate across a number of different people. So we really need that industry experience to help us build these frameworks in a meaningful way.
Exactly.
And
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 you
Dimitri,
basically
just
went quite
wanted
a
to
yeah.
Oh,
I just wanted to comment more on something Ainsley said that jogged my memory too. I think a lot of organizations get into a set it and forget it, so the AI is implemented and nobody's really necessarily checking back in, right? Is this helping the clinicians or not? And we had a perfect example of we have some imaging centers in our Florida market that love a particular AI algorithm and a group of radiologists in Ohio that couldn't stand it, and we ripped it out. It was the same algorithm, same version. It's just what it provided to them, and it's really kind of going back, checking in with them, and seeing, where is the vendor on this as well. Trying to keep up with, are there updates on the algorithm itself.
Yeah. So
I think
okay,
one of
Mike.
the adds to that is the proactive aspect of that versus your provider saying, hey, this algorithm is of no use to me, I want to get rid of it. Having that data at your fingertips that says, hey, this is not being used, or it
Yeah,
is being used, but the actual outcome is ineffective. Like that information to proactively manage how we use these solutions would be really valuable.
agree.
Awesome. No, agreed. So Tom, you're a bit unique here because you mentioned it earlier. You read for all these different facilities that all have their own governance structures, and I know Lucid Health has a very strong governance structure. How do you like pull all the threads together and enable them given the variety of frameworks?
Yeah, so we have our own internal AI committee that we formed that evaluates the AI that we're using, and um, we're doing a basically an evaluation of that, and trying to determine, will this provide any efficiencies, any quality gains, before we even present that out into the market. We realize that certain markets, we're basically approaching different markets with different AI as well. So an AI efficiency gain in one market, for example, where some of our radiologists are willing to leverage APP use, with the use of an algorithm to create some efficiency gains is something that we're looking at, but other markets don't, are not interested in that as well. So it's really kind of approaching all of our own internal physician groups and bringing them together to determine, really what's the pathway that we need to move forward with. I don't think there's you know, with over 400, radiologists, there's not there is one common one, it is in the dictation space because they have, seen huge efficiency gains, but from the pixel side, there's not a lot of excitement going on there. So, we're kind of slow playing to see where that, lands and, where things are going to end up. I'd like to see it more on our, from the Pixel side, I like to see it more on the PACS, the PACS providers providing some of that AI built in, on the imaging side. So I don't have to go out, they're kind of maintaining that. I don't have to go out and evaluate all these other different, AI pixel vendors.
So I think AI is just as much about how it's used as it is about what it does, right? So how these AI governance committees, I've seen some evolution. I think early on it was all about algorithmic characteristics. Now it's started to morph more into what's the outcomes of artificial intelligence? What's the impact of it? Is that consistent with your experiences? I'll open it up to whoever would like to answer that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this a little bit. We have a pretty robust AI governance structure. At times, I feel like our AI governance structure is probably too robust in that we sometimes just can't get projects through the funnel fast enough, and it gets very frustrating for some folks. So I think there has to be a balance between delivery and assessment that we just have to be able to manage. In our process, we go through a whole number of steps, but one of the largest steps is what we call our multi-dimensional assessment. And we essentially have a team assigned to like one of, I think, 8 or 10 categories. Things like our technical implementation or the technical mechanics of the solution, privacy, security, model card review, our data use policy. We have a privacy and a privacy team that goes through that. We have an ethical and equity considerations work group. We have all these work groups that are involved in these, and we need to make sure that there's a process to move things through there quickly enough to be effective. And I think so that's where we really have to strike a balance. And I think the thing we're going to run into over time is all of our IT solutions are going to have some component of AI in them. So we have to blend these things into our normal governance process at some point. I think there's good learnings by separating it out now, but eventually these things are going to have to come together more effectively.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I saw at Health 2 weeks ago. We were in an AI innovation category for an award, and they're not doing that award anymore because they said literally everything has AI embedded into it. So, sorry, in a hotel. Sorry. So apologies. I have a 4 p.m. checkout. I was answering her. Ainsley, in your advisory function, this is always fun. In your advisory function, like how are you guiding people on that? Like, are you recommending that they start to blend this with existing like HIPAA playbooks and IT governance, or are you still recommending distinct processes?
So it's such a great topic. And I, as one of the first chief AI officers in healthcare, I'm actually kind of much more moving along the lines of what you all are saying. I think that it's fundamentally needs to be the responsibility of every executive and then every person that is in leadership to deeply understand AI. And I do feel like at the end of the day, it is a form of technology. There was an article recently from McKinsey that referred to it as not a tool, but a capability. And I like that because it kind of adds that nuance that there is something different about AI than other tools we use. It's more complex, it's more extensive. It allows us to kind of cross all these silos that didn't touch each other. So I always think that there's going to be a need for a deep understanding of AI as a separate entity within the concept of tech. And we see that with just a lot of all the excitement and the development. I don't know how that will play out in terms of how it works across systems. I do feel that the governance problem has been solved though, Dimitri, to your point. Like when I ask C-suite leaders around the country, that's not what they want to talk about. It's like they're done with that. But I think many of them have the same problems you're mentioning, Matt, for sure. So it's not that it's just let's move on and let's start really deploying and scaling and understanding and learning. And I'm a big fan of just thought sharing. And so to your point, if a large practice like Lucid is scaling a solution, and I always felt like this when I was at KP as well in my leading radiology operations, I would always look and see what are the large private practices deploying, because I know that at the end of the day, they're looking sort of at their bottom line, but also trying to hopefully improve quality. And so I'm always sort of looking for that fundamental value shift of how do I improve the quality of care? How do I decrease the amount of time spending to generate that and then decrease the cost? Because then you're driving up, right, the value for everyone. So, I think we need to start proving that out. And again, continuing to show the ROI. We're seeing, I think, a lot more. I would say 2025 is the year of successful case studies and really seeing a lot of positive traction in the market, whether it's those small victories with getting CPT reimbursement, we'll take everyone we get, fundamentally, seeing a true return on investment, however you want to evaluate it, just even from this AI scribe market is really key for the rest of us. Seeing a couple of large exits that we've seen for companies that were sort of early in the space. I think everything is moving in the right direction. But ultimately we have to have everyone on the team be an almost like a chief AI officer. Like I like to joke, you look at the CEO, the COO, the CFO, that's who the chief AI officer is, because you can't sort of have anything function without everyone there having that subject matter expertise. And you maybe, you turn to your CTO really to probably be that main person, just like we do for all technology now. But at the same time, it's a capability, not a tool, as that article said. And therefore, if you're in an executive leadership position, you better understand that capability.
Yep. No, I think that's I think that's really important. And there's a lot of talk about AI tech, but doesn't seem to yet be this focus on adoption. I think it's starting to, emerge. There's been a lot of, recent conversation there. But like you could have the best tech, and but if you're not driving the behavior change needed to adopt it, it can actually inhibit the value. It can inhibit the impact of it. So Tom, like you've got 400 radiologists, you have dozens of sites, you have a large leadership team. How do you make sure that there isn't too much AI fatigue and that everything's fitting in to the environment in the way that it should, or maybe even changing it in the way it should?
Yeah, good question. I think from our radiologist standpoint, they don't want anything that slows them down in their day. So AI can provide a lot of good information up front for them, but if it's slowing them down, I don't think that they don't find the value in that. And so they're looking at it from an ROI perspective, just, as we are, but they're looking at it from an ROI on their efficiency gains in getting through their day. Couple of things, if the way that physicians have told me that they're looking at it is, am I able to, read more studies in a day? They're expected to increase their RVU, EVU, ratio of reads each, all the time. And so there's more expected of them. So what can make them more efficient so they can, power through more exams, but, not lose quality. And so we're looking at, I would say in the dictation space, there's, Red AI's Omni impression, generator, again, mentioned the case study that we saw an 11% savings in time, but also in talking with the physicians, it's also more of a, they get that like breath, well, the impression's being generated. They're saying, hey, I'm looking at the images one more time, scanning those over. So they're kind of feel like they're increasing quality and gaining efficiency at the same time. And then also I would say, we look at things from, ahead of time. It's important to measure these efficiency gains, do a pre-check up front of how long it's taking to complete a process. Ainsley and I were working on a project where, Lucid's probably one of a few organizations still that use transcriptionist editor functionality. And there's a lot of skepticism about removing the editors that will, make the radiologist more, inefficient. But when you really start to dig into that data and do a pre-survey of, okay, you're sending it to an editor, there's a delay there, while that goes to the editor, while they edit it, when it comes back, and then they have to proof it, read over the report. So, you have to do your due diligence up front too and measure, what you're trying to achieve with implementing the AI. What's your expectation that you're going to get out of this AI?
No, that's a great point. One of the ways to do that is, like Ainsley mentioned, the choosing the right use case, the small use case out of the gate to develop that trust. Matt, you mentioned a bridge earlier with like, the provenance map and other stuff, but with Yale's pretty robust AI adoption, do you have any other examples of like trust building moments that you've seen around the implementation, feedback loops, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think in the pixel space, I think one great use case that we've had we use AI doc in that space, but I think early on in our implementation, we had a great example of a patient with an outpatient CT, would have been read, it was done on a Friday, so probably would have been read on Monday. AI doc flagged it as a suspicious finding, immediately alerted the radiologist, they found that study, were able to call the patient back in for intervention. It's that kind of thing that I think builds trust in the tool set. And I think wins like that are what are going to continue to get people more engaged in using these tools. I think we have others in the back office space around follow-ups and critical result notifications where we automate that work and speed essentially time to intervention, which is also another trust building moment for the users of those tools. The one other thing I did want to ask, and it really is probably an Ainsley question, given that she's a radiologist, is, we talk about implementing these tools, and we talk about them as essentially like an extension of the existing workflow. At what point do you transition to the discussion that these tools will be more effective if the workflow fundamentally changes in a different way. I'm really curious because I think that's a hard sell. That I don't know how we really operationalize, but I think it's a huge opportunity at some point around these AI tools.
I love that, Matt. Are you talking about really having the AI do sort of more of the primary interpretation of the image and then feeding the report? Is that kind
Maybe
of
not even primary interpretation. Maybe the radiologist is still responsible for the interpretation component of it. But like Tom said, like my radiologists just want to be more efficient. And that means more efficient in the work that they currently do, how they currently do it. But what
Right.
if the tool was actually, if you did it a slightly different way, become 10 times more efficient? It's just different process. And how do you get from that original perception to the new one, which says process could actually really improve the overall efficiency?
I think what I'm hearing from you is how do we think big and sort of more disruptive?
Yeah.
I think one of the allegories is, I don't know if you guys have used the ChatGPT browser, right? And so this is sort of what people have talked about, right? That we're going to move from the way we're navigating even just our desktop, right? Clicking on folders. That's gonna be something we're going to look back on in 6 months and be like, why did I ever click with my mouse on a folder? I think, I don't know. And so, I see what you're saying. And I think that the challenge then for everyone on the call and for all of us is like, if we could start from scratch, how would we function as a radiologist? How would we make this better? Because we're not held back by those same tools. There are some companies out there that are slightly more disruptive, I think, in sort of the PAC space, the reporting space. Certainly Rad AI is doing a lot of new things on their roadmap. And I think that somehow we have to just make this easier for our rads, because I think it is still very manual how we just do everything, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have to paint that picture of what's to come. I don't know. I do think functioning more like the sort of that allegory of the way we interact with things, where it's more just typing in a question rather than finding things in a very sort of systematic way, even when it comes to our reporting.
To tag on to kind of what Matt says, and don't want to bombard you with questions, Ainsley, but how do you get? I'm having, sometimes having trouble. The radiologists are so busy right now these days, right? How do you get them interested in AI itself? Like I'm trying to get them excited and interested in it. What have you seen, in your experience?
So I think a lot of it is something that's not maybe unique to radiology, Tom, but it's almost like human nature, right? And I think at the end of the day, I think it comes back to something that Rad AI has done that I haven't seen other companies actually do yet, which is that individualization of a result that is AI generated. And I think that radiologists take a ton of pride in their product. And what is our product? Our product is our report. The problem with AI in general, and I'm talking now outside of healthcare, is we've seen it everywhere, right? It's like all the LinkedIn posts now like sound kind of the same, right? And we're losing that sort of individual aspect. And so we need to use AI, I think, to bring that back and to accelerate it. And that takes time. You don't see that with AI scribes in the clinic environment. Correct. Anyone on the call can correct me if I'm wrong. I've yet to see that. Certainly with the Rad AI product, there is individualization because it's trained on that individual radiologist. So I think that that's something that we need to talk about more, probably across every profession. If you're an attorney, presumably there's something about you. You're the number one attorney in New York. Presumably there's something about you that makes you good. How can AI build off of what makes you good rather than just help everyone? And I think the reason it's relevant to your point, Tom, is that physicians are all different. One of the things I hear come up a lot is when you look at the more seasoned physicians within, now I'm talking about like a primary care practice, psychiatry practice, surgical, they actually are the ones that are kind of the most skeptical of AI with good reason, right? They know what they're doing. They're very smart. They're at the top of their game. And so they can probably do things quickly. But my guess is when you ask them, are there things in your day you'd rather be doing? Or are there things you could be done more efficiently? We should listen to them and we should try to work towards addressing their problems. Whereas if you look at radiologists, say, who are coming out who are earlier, I think they're going to be much more rapid adopters. And then just to put a pin in that, Tom, these med students graduating, they're going to run circles around us and we're going to have to keep up with them. I always think of the allegory of point of care ultrasound, which is not a popular one in the radiology world, but I deployed that across KP. And one of the reasons we had to do it is we had all these doctors coming out of training that were proficient in point of care ultrasound. And then we had the more seasoned doctors that were like, are you kidding me? Like, that's the last thing I need to add into my already like very busy day. So I think that we're going to be held accountable by this next generation. And so I think the fact that we're doing this, we're building it up for them. The last piece I'll sort of say is I hear the same thing from companies I work with. Every system I go into, it's like I have to reinvent my entire core value proposition. I have to do customization of work. And I don't see that changing because healthcare is so complex and different, and the human body is extremely complex and different. And so I think we need to stop trying to simplify and standardize things and use AI to make things more precise, to really put like that precision back in the tools we make individualized for the physician, but then also for the individual patient. I don't have the solution to that or the answer.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Tom. Oh, okay.
No, just saying now, thanks. I appreciate that. That's helpful.
We'll be in it together. It's gonna be a fun 5 years.
Yeah, I think the sheer ubiquity of AI right now. My dad, commercial fisherman, he talks about AI, in Europe. Like it's everywhere. It's kind of portrayed as everything. I'm a little worried about, over-reliance on it in some situations, particularly for new graduates that might not be used to it. What happens if it isn't there? How are y'all thinking about that, when it comes to integrating into the workflow? I'll start with Matt.
Yeah, it's an important one. I think we talk about this a lot. There was actually I think it was a study, but I can't remember the specific details. But essentially, there was a trial with like an endoscopy AI tool that found automatically identified polyps. You had a bunch of trainees using that tool, and then you took the tool away and asked them to identify those polyps. They had no idea. Their error rate was massive. So I think we do have to remember that the humans still need to learn their trade. They need the appropriate skills to manage clinical care in an appropriate way. And we need to make sure we're providing that background education, but then while also, to Ainsley's point, using these tools to help support them, not replace kind of the domain knowledge that you need to do your job. I think another really good example in this space is, and a good example around how residents or our new medical students are really going to surpass us in an instant. Right now, we see people using ChatGPT, Open Evidence, you name it, Doximity, to create discharge summaries. They basically take the patient's chart, dump it into those tools, and all of a sudden they produce a discharge summary, so they don't have to do it themselves. Now, that is a really efficient process and is probably a smart move on the resident's part, but we need to make sure they know how to do that the appropriate way with the appropriate tools and understand what they're doing before they do it, so that they've actually learned that skill and make sure that the discharge summary is absolutely appropriate.
And
I
I'll
think those
assume
are things
putting that into a Yale-approved safe version of ChatGPT.
Yeah, but I think the problem here's the catch-22, right? If we don't actually publish and document an approved tool because we're still working through our governance process work, our residents or our users are going to figure out a way to make that work because it makes their lives easier. So we have to kind of, again, there's that balance between speed to delivery and making sure we do all the appropriate assessments.
So we've got about 10 minutes here. I want to plug that we do have a Q&A if there's any questions from the audience. Obviously, you can see we're not shy on opinions here. So now, again, that ubiquity of AI, everywhere, everything, that type of conversation, I think it's offered us an opportunity to kind of reinvent. Like if you think about the EHR adoption, that was in reaction to federal regulation, and you had to do it. So you couldn't really change what you were doing. You kind of just try to do it in the new system so you weren't getting penalized. And initially you were getting rewarded and then penalized after that. I look at AI as an opportunity to almost reset what we're doing. I think Ainsley mentioned earlier, if you could start from scratch in the workflow, what would you do? And I know that's very hard. Even when I'm doing our demo dictations, I still say period paragraph, and you don't need to. I've been saying I've been demoing speech recognition for 20 years, and I'm used to that. So I can only imagine a radiologist that's been reading for 20 years, trying to stop something like that. So Ainsley, how do you see clinicians, helping to shape the workflows instead of just being the end user? Like how do you see pulling them in so they become part of the conversation and able to articulate where they would see value?
It's a really important question. And actually, in some of the work that's come out of, I believe it was the ACP, it does seem like physicians really feel like their voice is not being heard by these companies, especially in primary care. They don't feel like they're really being asked to provide input. I think conversations like these are important. My team speaks at a lot of various events with physicians. I love talking to the doctors who are in the trenches. And I think we can all do a better job of that, to really listen to what's their problem and not just talk. I love seeing all the physicians that went to health this year. And I think one of the things though you do hear is we want to make sure we're talking to decision makers, but then I think it's the decision makers who need to be listening to super users within their department, to really cultivating this culture of, we called them at Kaiser Permanente departmental technology leads, right? So that doesn't mean that you have a certificate in large language models from Stanford. That means that you love technology and you think technology can enhance your practice. Therefore, you'd be the person who would maybe get to touch the tech first. And then it would be on you to sort of share that with the rest of your colleagues. I think we're seeing physician and nursing leadership at a level we haven't before in the technology and innovation space. Whether it's just engaging with industry, whether it's engaging with investors, whatever it may be, and whatever you think about that, if we don't have the actual operators and clinical leaders shaping, the future sort of sculpting of this area, we're not going to get any problem solved. So I think we've actually done a pretty good job with that. How does that translate though to when you deploy the tool? I think it's incredibly important to get feedback from your frontline teams, because some of the studies around, for instance, AI scribes have shown that the ROI you get is only directly dependent on the amount it's used. So if 75% of your radiologists don't think they need an AI scribe, that's probably not going to pay for itself. We know that it's incredibly good for physician retention. In the vast majority of cases, it's been an extremely popular use case. So, but it may be like Tom said, he has got a whole practice that say doesn't want something. You want to listen to that. And it can be really humbling because, it's just a reminder that we're all different. But I think that's the art of medicine, right? Not the science of medicine. I love the recent work that's coming out around tracking, the skilling. And there was that concept of de-skilling that was sort of demystified, I think, and kind of debunked a little bit. But then we need to track this, and healthcare is going to have to lead in this space because we have by far a very wide deployment of AI. And so we're going to have to learn and then teach other sectors and other industries, how do you track, how this impacts us as a profession. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I feel like I'm learning from AI and then that scares me because I'm like, is this Hal from A Space Odyssey? Like I actually just learned something from an AI. But we learn from Google searches, we learn from PubMed searches. I learned from using the Dewey Decimal System, I guess, in second grade. I mean, when I got some book, right? So we've been learning from things outside of us for a long time. So, but we have to make sure we question things. When I look up sometimes references and you follow that trail of that reference, that is a completely bogus reference.
So
Like,
I
I don't know
think
if that's happened to you guys, but you go and then you go to PubMed, it's completely unrelated to the topic that it was talking about. So I would caution anyone who's taking AI generated things at face value, because you're going to end up potentially looking a little foolish when it comes to sort of that more in-depth analysis.
Well, I think that's a great illustration of both the challenge of massive amounts of information. Like, information doubling in healthcare is in the days, months, most nowadays. And I think about recently we announced a partnership with RSNA Ventures, and it's about delivering the RSNA library of evidence to the point of care for the radiologist, like a trusted AI-enabled domain source and things like that. We got a question on the Q&A that was actually really good, and it's from Anand Sagar, I think. Apologies if I messed up your name. Their question is, are companies working towards an end goal of helping medical organizations not replace physicians, but significantly reduce their workload? And are we heading towards a point where AI could scan a patient, ask relevant questions, and then provide a diagnosis? I have an opinion, but I think yours are more important. So would love to hear yours.
Matt, there's your disruptive idea. I love it. So
Yeah,
scan a patient. What was it, Dimitri? Scan a patient.
and ask relevant questions. This is an interesting one. Les, I think there's more opportunity outside of the radiology use case in terms of patient access. So imagine an agent who essentially does that initial screening of a patient for a given condition and then routes the patient to the appropriate specialty for follow-up. I think that's an awesome use case of agentic AI tools to support our access initiatives, which almost every healthcare organization now has an access issue somewhere. And I think the ability to get the right people to the right place at the right time is where agents can absolutely help us. And we're not quite there yet, but I think there are a lot of opportunities to do a lot more in that space.
Yeah, I think the other part of their question was our company's working towards an end goal of helping medical orgs not replace, but reduce their workload. And Ainsley, I think earlier you had mentioned all the other pieces that a radiologist does. It's not just, eyes on the image. It's the calls. It's it's the critical result call of a stroke to a physician that knows the patient's having a stroke and already treating them. And the disruptive nature of that. Like, do you see ways that AI could, really start to enable that side of the workflow for the radiologist?
I definitely do. I think there's a huge opportunity there. Obviously I would say that just in general, I felt that the conversation has moved from replacing radiologists and other people to augmenting. I think people finally realize if you're trying to sell to a customer, probably the worst way to do that is to tell them you're no longer going to be a customer of mine. Like, it just makes no sense, right? And so now we have to delight the customers. We have to make their lives better. Computer vision has come a long way. I've been told for many years AI is going to replace me. Like I always say, bring it on. Like, when that day comes, happy to review. I think at the end of the day, our specialty took that as a challenge, right? We lead among all medical specialties in publications, in AI, whatever it may be. And so when the day comes that computer vision is making our jobs easier, to Matt's point and Tom's point, there's plenty of other things for me to do. I'll synthesize that AI generated report. I'll then take it with all the EMR data. I'll synthesize the pathology reports, and I'll actually tell you what it means, because I think it's a long time before we're going to take at face value a significant recommendation from AI that would truly impact what type of surgery is done, what type of radiation a patient receives. I think there's starting to be more of a humble approach. I just don't hear that come up from any of the companies I work with, and we caution against that. And especially with the agentic piece, Dimitri, to your point, you have to be really careful when you're going in and saying, we're going to use agents to do what you do now, right? I mean, there is obviously a cost avoidance benefit potentially for the overall organization if you could use those people who are doing something to do something else. But there's such a shortage of staff. I think it's just a matter of I like the word increasing efficiency and taking away those things that are not adding joy, because everyone would love to spend a little more time, I'm sure, with their families and doing the things they love to do.
I saw an article that Joint Commission is going to add to part of their accreditation criteria staffing levels, within the institutions. So that's definitely a thing. Now, you brought up an interesting business case, which is we're going to put you out of a job. That's obviously not a good business case to ever present if you're a vendor. I think you all have seen more than I have, from this side. What are some viable business models for AI companies? This came in as a Q&A. So Tom, you've probably seen the most just in the practice and the CIO role.
Yeah, I don't think that any of the radiologists I'm talking with they're not concerned about being put out of a job. I think they know where AI is at, and they realize their value. So I don't think that that's really a concern. And so I think that again, I think the market is shifting more towards, the early focus and the low-hanging fruit was, again, the pixelated AI. But really where the value comes in is, along with what Ainsley was saying, easing the radiologist workload and picking out those other things, mentioned earlier on, work list, queuing up the right studies for the radiologist so they're not, hunting and pecking, for different studies that they should be reading, and just kind of learning their reading patterns, doing things like that. Again, on the report side, on the back end, giving them that break, and the mental break really from, churning away on study after study right now. I think that's really where the value is. And I wanted to touch one thing on, what Ainsley was saying earlier. Where I really see AI making, AI is making a difference when the physicians are evangelizing the AI itself. When it's going from peer to peer, and that evangelization is happening, and then other, radiologists or other clinicians are coming to you and say, I want that AI, or I want, include me in the, in the core group that's utilizing that. That's when it's making a difference in your organization.
That's powerful. Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left. You want to do one last quick round robin, 30 seconds each. Where is AI overhyped right now, in your opinion, and where do you think it deserves more attention? Tom, you already touched on this a little bit, so I'll go to Ainsley.
I think that the word clinical decision support is thrown around a little bit too much. I think there's some great tools in that space. I think they need to be much better integrated within the system to really move the needle for doctors. And so that's going to be, like we call it, the holy grail of medicine. And I think that it would be great to see us get there.
So it's both. Okay, Matt?
Yeah, I don't know if I call it overhype, because I think the hype is somewhat real, but I think the valuation, I'll call it, of ambient listening is massive now. And I think with entrance in the space, with all the entrance in the space, and with Epic coming in and saying they're going to develop this capability, you're going to see massive changes in that space in terms of how those companies that are now competing with Epic demonstrate their value. So I think there's tremendous opportunity there, but I think there's also going to have to be a rapid change and evolution in those companies in order to kind of keep up with what Epic is doing in the space. But one other thing that I think I'm pretty interested in around the AI space is the use of foundation models in imaging. I think there's some very interesting opportunity there, because I think most current AI models in the imaging space are essentially very targeted to very specific findings. And if we can generalize that more and make it more ubiquitous across a number of different conditions in a single implementation, I think that's actually going to be a very interesting concept, and something I think is going to have tremendous value in the future.
Awesome. And with that, unfortunately, we have to wrap because we're at time. I'm not going to call you panelists. I would like to thank my co-hosts, Matt and Tom. This was a great conversation. Thank you all so much.